Just wanted to pick up on something you said about Ophelia, or playing Ophelia. Something about it. It's a thankless part, and so I want to talk about what I see as the hidden meaning behind. Well, in particular here, in particular with Ophelia's role in Hamlet, but it also applies to all the roles and all the plays as well, which is what I've been obsessing about for the last best part of the last decade. In terms of understanding cryptic messages, a couple of things. I once had a talk given by Richard Olivier, which was Laurence Olivier's son, Richard, actually given at Elsinore to a group of people, some kind of after dinner type of speech. Of course, he was talking about Hamlet, and he said something like, Shakespeare always leaves a cryptic clue in the first scene. He didn't specify cryptic about what, but I thought, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and I've used that. It's like I always look for a cryptic clue in the first scene, or at least the first act. And there always is something amazing, a key to the whole play. Nietzsche said profoundly, he says, those that cannot hear the music think those that are dancing are insane. I'm asking you, I guess, as a friend, to just be open to the music, to see if you can hear the music. And it's a very apt metaphor. So just a bit of backstory, a bit of context. One of the key ways that Shakespeare communicates his cryptic message is through the use of archetypes of our consciousness. These are aspects, energy fields that comprise us as humans. And he identifies them, interestingly, as God's serpent. They're in pairs, they're in opposing pairs. The God serpent, or the shadow, the soul, okay, which is the true self, which is represented in his theology by Adam and Eve, and the ego, which is the false self, the personality, the part of us that we generally tend to identify as me, I might add erroneously, because it ain't. He refers to that as Cain and Abel. So he's using these biblical terms. If you think about it, right under the nose of the church and the crown during the Reformation, it's so it's so audacious and so incredibly dangerous for him to do this, but he's done it. Okay, so that's the basis of it, and I'm going to suggest here that the soul, the true self, the Adam/Eve aspect, is represented by, well, interestingly, Hamlet and Ophelia, playing the male-female polarities of the soul, and the false self, the ego aspect around us, are acted out by Claudius and Gertrude. So the first thing is looking at the first scene. What are the guards talking about? They're talking about 3 or 4 very key things, not a lot to do with ostensibly what the play is about, apart from the appearance of the ghost. They're talking about the return of Fortinbras. Okay. That's a funny name. It's not a real name. It's not a real king. I know he's the nephew of the previously deposed king or some such. But if you take the name Fortinbras, and think about, well, who is he? Who is he? Who or what might he symbolize? In Shakespeare's theology, he makes it, I say, clear. I mean, if you read the symbols, it becomes clear. His mission is to return what is currently called the sound current in sort of more modern parlance, which Shakespeare refers to as the ear of Denmark, which in turn relates to the tree of life or the waters of life, which were cut off in the beginning in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve were banished. The tree of life was cut off. Okay, so that's a bit of context, if you like, of what the story could be telling us about. So, what else are the guys talking about? They're talking about Christmas. There are various references to the Christmas season. And they're also talking about the cock crowing twice. And in the text, not very often actually in productions, but in the text it says, they hear a cock crowing twice. During that first scene when the guards are talking about the appearance and disappearance of the ghost and the circumstances. All right, so jumping forward, it's a passage in the Gospel, which you may or may not be familiar with. It's quite well known. It's about where Jesus says to Peter, before the cock crows twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. Okay, this is just one of many threads running through Hamlet, but this one specifically appertains to Ophelia. Okay, so Peter, then in the Bible, it says Peter denies Christ 3 times, and then he hears the cock crow, and he weeps. Okay, so that's the sort of biblical story. But also, according to Shakespeare, he's saying, again, deeply, deeply heretically, and still would be heretical, but the story on the surface of the Bible belies, if you like, it's just a vehicle for the story underneath, the mystical story that's hidden in the Bible that most people do not know about and dare not, and certainly in the beginning of early days of Christianity, wouldn't, they would mention it or even think about it at their peril because it was so fiercely heretical, or deemed to be heretical. So you've got this little scene where Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Here's the cock crow. All right. So I'm suggesting, asking that the crowing of the cock, the idea of the cock crowing, is a symbolic reference by Jesus, actually, not just by Shakespeare. Shakespeare's picking it up by Jesus about the sound current, the sound of the waters of life, or the tree of life, that was cut off in the beginning, which also relates to the sound of the name Fortinbras. So out of many, many symbolic references to the events in the Jesus story, shall we call it, in Hamlet, this one is particularly, and what I think is utterly sublime. After the to be or not to be speech, Ophelia comes to him, and he brutalizes her. He denies her 3 times. He says, I've got it here. I don't know if you've read this book, which is definitive in this sphere. She says, my lord, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. And Hamlet says, no, I never gave you aught. And then he says about something else. Says, oh, I did love you once. And then he says, I loved you not. So he's contradicting himself, and but importantly, he's denying his love and his relationship with Ophelia 3 times. And then he banishes her and curses her. He says, get thee to a nunnery. Okay, banishes her. I'll give thee this plague for a dowry. And he curses her. Now, this is what happened in the Garden of Eden. Okay. Adam and Eve were banished and they were cursed. So here it is in Hamlet. Very subtle. But this is beyond subtle, what happens next. And then Ophelia gives a speech, a soliloquy, monologue, whatever you want to call it. Part of which, okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but part of which is classical. Oh, what a noble mind is here o'erthrown. And I, of ladies most deject and wretched, that sucked the honey of his musicked vows, now see that noble and most sovereign reason, like sweet bells jangled out of time and harsh. That unmatched form and stature of blown youth, blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me, to have seen what I've seen, to see what I see. Okay, I feel like that sometimes. But, okay, so you've got the three denials of Hamlet, of Ophelia by Hamlet, followed by three things hidden in that speech that, I don't know, there's a long backstory as to how I came to see these things, which I'll tell you maybe, hopefully, sometime. What a noble mind is here overthrown. So that's a pun. Overthrown is a pun. Overthroned. Okay. The mind, the kingdom of the mind has now been overthrown. The kingdom of the mind is the kingdom of Satan. Satan usurped the consciousness of mankind. And he took up, if you like, residence inside the mind of man, the mind and the emotions, the ego of man, the personality of man, primarily through the mind. That's how he gets us. That's how he rules. That's how he keeps the awareness of the sound, the name, and the knowledge, the awareness of who we really are, which is a soul, which is, if you like, a spark of God. He keeps it cut off. He keeps it unknown, unrealized, unless you happen to break through. So that is what Jesus came to overthrow. He overthrew, he reclaimed, if you like, the kingdom that had been usurped by the negative power, what we metaphorically call Satan. So, oh, what a noble mind. The mind is overthrown. And then she says two things. Suck the honey of his musicked vows. Now that's an allusion to the sound current, the word, the waters of life. If you study the mystical teachings, which I've been studying these things for 40 years, I've just recognized them. Just like, oh my God, that's one of the sounds. It's the sound of bees making honey and buzzing. You hear the sound. Shakespeare uses that a lot. Julius Caesar, Titus Andronicus uses that same kind of symbol for that particular sound. And then he says, like sweet bells jangled. And again, the sound of the bells is another one of the sounds, the mystical sounds that you can hear in, if you do deep inner meditation in a particular way, you can hear these sounds. You might recognize it from the Tempest. Where the bee sucks, there suck I. In a cowslip's bell I lie. So those are two references, the same two references in the Tempest, of many in the Tempest, as it happens, that Hamlet, that Ophelia here is using. Okay. Right, so hang in there. There's something going on, all right? Hang in there. So the next we hear about Ophelia is she drowns. and I think you said you played Gertrude, so you know this speech, where Gertrude describes the death of Ophelia. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you know, you probably realize she falls from what's described as a pendant bough, askant a brook. If you think about a pendant bough, it's a branch of a tree, pendant, suspended, hanging. So it's like, you know, I know it's a reach, I know it's a stretch, but it's a crucifixion. It's a crucifixion image, or it can be seen that way. But it doesn't stop there because it's always confirmed. Shakespeare always confirms. He backs it up and backs it up and backs it up. All these things. So there's the idea of a pendant bough, which could be the crucifix. So it's a crucifixion metaphor, symbol. And then what is she wearing? She's wearing coronet weeds. Coronet's a crown. Weeds, thorns. She's wearing a crown of thorns. And long purples. She's the purple robe. So the crown of thorns and the purple robe were the items of clothing, as it were, given to Jesus at the trial to mock him, you know, for claiming that he was the king of the Jews. Okay. Now Shakespeare does that a lot, a lot. Rosencrantz, for example, means crown of thorns, roses, thorns, roses, crown of rosencrantz. You look in the play, Macbeth, you know, upon my head they placed a fruitless crown. You know, it's one of his things, and there's some theology behind that he goes into too, which I won't hear, but happy to. All right. So she drowns. She falls in a brook, which is the water, flowing water, the waters of life, and it doesn't just sink to the bottom. She's suspended. She floats on the waters, chanting old lords. Yeah? Chanting old lords. Lords are praises, which again is symbolic for the names of God, which are the initiation tones, the initiation chants that the initiates use, chant, you know, throughout time. And there she is, using these, she's drowning, she's floating on the waters of life, chanting these tones. And well, I mean, if you look a little bit further, at the same time as Ophelia is drowning, Hamlet has been arrested, if you remember, and he's traveling across the waters to England, and he leaps. They're then beset by pirates, and he leaps across the waters into the pirate vessel. Okay, at the same time as Ophelia is. So the implication is that Hamlet and Ophelia are playing this dual role of the soul, which could be translated as Jesus the man versus Jesus the Christ, if you want to go in that particular direction, which is the direction that Shakespeare is taking us. You know, this is all inside us. You know, these are the states of consciousness inside us that were shut down, blocked, and they were liberated through this completely, utterly distorted and misunderstood action of what Jesus actually did. Okay, so there's more. There's a clincher. Clincher scene. I went crazy when I saw this. As you know, if you know the Bible, Jesus was buried outside the city walls. He carried the cross to a place called Golgotha or Calvary, depending on whether you like the Hebrew word or the Latin word. And he was crucified and then buried uh, outside the city walls at Golgotha. Okay. So when Hamlet returns to England, not England, to Denmark from England, the first thing he does with Horatio is he finds a grave and he picks up the skull of Yorick. He has a conversation with the skull. He talks to this skull, and there's loads of skulls in this grave. Okay. And then he discovers it's been dug for Ophelia. Ophelia was buried in the grave that was full of skulls. If you look up what the meaning of the word Golgotha is in Hebrew, or Calvary in Latin, it means, drumroll, da-da, the place of the skull. But the genius, the way he's actually concealed this dangerous heretical knowledge, that it's our birthright to know. Surely we need to know, because it's not some biblical story. It's about us. It's something that relates to who we are, why we're here, what our purpose is, what our destiny is, what our possibility is, and where we come from, where we go to. It's huge, massively important stuff. So, and the key paradigm shifts that Shakespeare is using is, I mentioned them before, but that instead of using pure characters, he's using characterizations of the archetypes, the three core archetypes of our inner world, which in fact the Bible is also doing. Okay. Yeah. Another story. He's also making 37, one for each play, iterations, the same theme, over and over again, which is variations on the deep soul-centric story, the story of the evolution of our soul, who we are from the beginning. Call it metaphorically the rise and fall of Satan. And in this instance, where Ophelia, she represents the soul, the spirit, sometimes AKA, it's a very heavily religiously laden word, but Christ in each of us, in all of us. Christ is a Greek word. It just means anointed one. So Jesus, he exemplified the ultimate possibility of that part that's in all of us. Okay, and in the Bible, he reopened the tree of life. He reopened what Shakespeare in Hamlet is calling the ear of Denmark, where Denmark kind of represents mankind. Elsinore perhaps will represent the Garden of Eden. Okay, so that's what this play is largely about, primarily about. So all the plays are about, and that's the importance of the role Ophelia played. So if you are interested in finding out more about this, I suggest you go to my website, which is paulhunting.com, and grab yourself a free chapter and find out why something is rotten in the state of Denmark. I'm going to say adieu at that point, and I hope I speak to you again very soon. Adios.